The dinner that changed everything. How I made my daughter-in-law regret her words. Mary's voice trembling slightly. Well, hello there, my dear friends. Pull up a chair, pour yourself some tea, and settle in because what I'm about to tell you. It's going to take a while and Lord knows it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My name is Mary, I'm 72 years old, and I never thought at this age I'd be sitting here, telling strangers on the internet about the night that changed absolutely everything in my family. But here we are. And before I begin, if you enjoy stories about justice, about standing up for yourself when the world tries to push you down, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more real stories from real people who've lived long enough to know that silence isn't always golden. And please, I'm so curious. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Are you in a small town like mine? A big city? Another country entirely? I'd love to know who's out there, listening to an old woman's tale of revenge. Now let me paint you a picture of that New Year's Eve dinner. The house was warm, almost too warm with all the cooking I'd been doing since dawn. I'd made my famous pot roast, the one my late husband Robert used to say could bring tears to a grown man's eyes. I'd baked fresh rolls, prepared 3 different vegetable dishes, and spent hours on a chocolate cake that stood 3 layers tall on my good china cake stand. The table was set with the linens I'd embroidered myself 40 years ago, the ones I only brought out for special occasions. Candles flickered in the centerpieces I'd arranged that morning, and everything looked perfect. Picture perfect. The kind of scene you'd see in a magazine about family gatherings. My son Michael sat at the head of the table, 38 years old and looking so much like his father it sometimes hurt to look at him directly. And next to him sat Jessica, his wife of 5 years. 29 years old, blonde, beautiful in that sharp-edged way that always made me slightly uncomfortable, like she was a knife disguised as a decoration. She worked in marketing for some tech company, always talking about brand positioning and market disruption in a way that made my head spin. I tried, Lord knows I tried, to bond with this woman. I'd invited her to lunch, offered to teach her my recipes, asked about her work even when I didn't understand half of what she said. But there was always this wall between us, this invisible barrier that I could never quite breach. The dinner had been going well enough. We'd made it through the appetizers, through most of the main course. I was just beginning to relax, thinking maybe this year would be different. Maybe this would be the holiday where Jessica and I finally found some common ground. My son was telling a story about something that had happened at his office, and I was laughing, really laughing for the first time in weeks. That's when she said it. Jessica picked up her wine glass, my good crystal, the set Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, and she looked around the table with this smile. Not a warm smile, mind you. A smirk. That's the only word for it. A smirk that made my stomach clench even before she opened her mouth. Well, she said, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite name but definitely didn't like. This is the most failure of our family, isn't it? The words hung in the air like smoke. I stopped mid-bite, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. Everyone laughed. Everyone. My son Michael gave this uncomfortable chuckle, looking down at his plate. My daughter Sarah, who'd driven in from 2 hours away with her husband and kids, let out this nervous giggle. Even my grandchildren looked around uncertainly before joining in with that fake laughter children produce when they sense adult tension but don't understand it. But my son, my Michael, he just watched. Said nothing. Didn't defend me, didn't question his wife, didn't even ask what she meant. He just sat there, cutting his pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, his face carefully neutral. I set down my fork very carefully. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't let them. Not yet. Not in front of her. Excuse me? I said quietly, but Jessica had already moved on, was already talking to Sarah about some restaurant in the city, some place with a Michelin star and a 6-month waiting list, some place that served foam instead of real food, probably. I stopped eating. Just stopped. Put my napkin on the table, folded it precisely the way my mother had taught me when I was 6 years old, and sat there in silence while everyone else continued their meals, continued their conversations, continued pretending that nothing had just happened. But something had happened. Something had cracked open inside my chest, and I could feel 30 years of small slights, subtle insults, and quiet dismissals all flooding through that crack like water through a broken dam. 30 minutes. That's how long I lasted. 30 minutes of sitting at my own table in my own home, listening to Jessica talk about her upcoming promotion, about the cruise she and Michael were planning, about the new car they just ordered. 30 minutes of watching my son avoid my eyes. 30 minutes of being invisible in my own home. Then I stood up. "I'm not feeling well," I said to no one in particular, and I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and for the first time in 5 years, I let myself cry about Jessica. About my son's silence. About the slow creeping realization that I had become the failure in my own family. But here's the thing about being 72 years old, my friends. Here's what I've learned in 7 decades of living on this earth. When you've survived a husband's death, raised 2 children alone, put yourself through night school in your 40s to become a bookkeeper so you could make ends meet, and manage to keep your home and your dignity through all of it, well, you don't stay down for long. I dried my tears. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked, and I saw my mother's eyes looking back at me. Strong eyes. Survivor's eyes. And I made a decision right then and there. If Jessica thought I was the failure of this family, I was going to show her what this failure was capable of. Now, you might be expecting me to tell you I did something dramatic that very night. Threw her out of my house perhaps, or made a scene. But no. That's not how real revenge works, dear friends. Real revenge is patient. Real revenge is strategic. Real revenge takes time to simmer, like a good stew, until all the flavors have properly developed. I went back to the dinner table exactly 35 minutes after I'd left. I apologized for my absence, blamed it on indigestion, and I smiled. Oh, how I smiled. I asked Jessica about her work. I complimented her dress. I was the picture of the sweet, harmless old lady she clearly thought I was. But in my mind, I was already planning. You see, I'd been doing some thinking while I was in my bedroom. I'd been piecing together conversations I'd overheard, comments Jessica had made, little things I'd noticed but never really examined. Jessica was very proud of her career, very invested in her image as this successful, sophisticated woman. Her entire identity seemed wrapped up in how people perceived her. And more than that, she was competitive. Fiercely, almost pathologically competitive, especially with other women. The next morning, New Year's Day, I started making phone calls. I called my old friend Margaret, whose daughter worked in corporate recruiting. I called my former colleague Susan, whose son-in-law was a vice president at a competing tech firm. I called people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who owed me favors from various kindnesses I'd done over the decades, and I started gathering information. Within a week, I knew everything about Jessica's company, her position, her responsibilities, and most importantly, her vulnerabilities. I learned that she'd been angling for a director position for over a year. I learned that there was another woman in her department, someone named Rachel, who was also being considered for the same role. I learned that Jessica had been subtly sabotaging Rachel's projects, taking credit for her ideas, and generally making her professional life miserable. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but I won't pretend I didn't do it. Through Margaret's daughter, I arranged for Rachel to receive an anonymous package. Inside was documentation of every instance where Jessica had taken credit for Rachel's work. Dates, emails, meeting notes. I'd put together a timeline that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. You see, I might be 72, but I spent 20 years as a bookkeeper. I know how to organize information. I know how to build a case. But that was just the beginning. Jessica and Michael lived in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of place where appearances matter more than almost anything else. They had a homeowners association with strict rules about everything from lawn maintenance to approved paint colors. Through my network of friends, never underestimate the power of a group of senior citizens with time on their hands and a common purpose. I learned that Jessica had been violating several HOA regulations. Nothing major, mind you. A fence slightly too tall here, unauthorized landscaping there, parking in the wrong spot too often. Small things that had been overlooked because she was charming and new to the neighborhood. I anonymously submitted formal complaints to the HOA board, each one meticulously documented with photographs, measurements, and references to the specific bylaws being violated. I made sure each complaint came from a different source, some from email addresses belonging to friends who were happy to help, others from untraceable accounts I created myself. Yes, I learned how to set up anonymous email accounts. YouTube tutorials are wonderful things. But still I wasn't satisfied. Material inconveniences weren't enough. I needed something deeper, something that would strike at the heart of who Jessica thought she was. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I joined Facebook. I created an account, learned how to use it properly, and I started connecting with people from Jessica's past. High school friends, college roommates, former colleagues. I was just sweet old Mary, Michael's mother, trying to understand the woman my son had married, trying to build bridges. And oh, the stories I heard. Jessica, it turned out, had a history. In college, she'd been part of a group that had bullied another student so severely the girl had transferred schools. In her first job, she'd been accused of taking credit for a major campaign her assistant had developed. There was a pattern, you see. A long, consistent pattern of Jessica elevating herself by stepping on others. I compiled everything. Every story, every incident, every moment where Jessica had shown who she really was. And I created a private blog, nothing public, nothing that could be traced directly to me. Just a collection of facts, carefully curated and organized. Then I waited. The HOA violations caught up with her first. Michael called me 3 weeks after New Year's, frustrated and confused about the sudden complaints. Mom, he said, I don't understand it. Jessica's so upset. The HOA is threatening fines and demanding we make all these changes. Some neighbors are being really hostile. Oh, honey, I said, my voice dripping with sympathy, that sounds so stressful. I'm sure it will blow over. It didn't blow over. The fines mounted. The tension in their neighborhood grew. I heard through my sources that Jessica had a breakdown at a neighborhood meeting, accused people of targeting her, made herself look unstable in front of everyone who mattered in her carefully constructed social world. 2 weeks after that, Rachel got the promotion Jessica had wanted. Not only that, but HR launched an investigation into Jessica's conduct based on the evidence Rachel had received. Jessica wasn't fired, the company was too afraid of lawsuits for that, but she was publicly reprimanded and moved to a different department. A demotion in everything but name. Michael called again. Mom, Jessica's going through a really hard time at work. I don't know all the details, but someone's been spreading rumors about her, making accusations. It's really affecting her. Oh no, I said, how terrible. Is she okay? She's really stressed, Mom. She cries a lot. She thinks people are out to get her. Something in his voice made me pause. Not concern for Jessica exactly, but something else. Doubt, maybe. Like he was starting to see cracks in the facade. The final piece fell into place in March. I'd been patient, so patient, waiting for the right moment. Through one of Jessica's former college friends, a woman named Diana who'd been more than happy to talk once I mentioned Jessica's name, I learned that Jessica had been planning a major social media campaign to establish herself as a thought leader in her industry. She'd been working on it for months, planning to launch it around her birthday in April. I made sure that blog I'd created, the one documenting Jessica's history, somehow found its way to several key influencers in her industry. Just a link shared from an anonymous account with a simple message. Thought you should know who you're platforming. The campaign never launched. Instead, several people Jessica had invited to participate pulled out, citing vague concerns about brand alignment. Her professional social media presence, which she'd cultivated so carefully, began to wither as people who'd followed her started quietly unfollowing. April came and went. May arrived. And then one evening in late May, I got a call from Michael. Mom, he said, and his voice was different. Harder. I need to ask you something. My heart seized in my chest. Had I been too careless? Had I left some trail that led back to me? Jessica's been going through her old messages, he continued, trying to figure out who might have it out for her. She found some Facebook friend requests from months ago. From you. I stayed silent. Mom, she says you've been talking to people from her past. Diana from college. Karen from her first job. She thinks she's accused you of. Mom, tell me you haven't been. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. I could deny everything, play the innocent old lady, maintain my cover. Or I could own what I'd done. Michael, I said quietly, do you remember New Year's Eve dinner? Silence on the other end of the line. Do you remember what your wife said to me? In my own home at my own table after I'd spent hours cooking for your family? More silence. She called me the most failure of our family. And you said nothing. You just watched. You didn't defend me, didn't question her, didn't even ask what she meant. You just sat there and let her humiliate me. Mom, it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, Michael. And even if it was cruel. And you let it happen. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. And for a long moment, Neither of us spoke. I raised you better than that, I said finally. I raised you to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I raised you to be kind, to be strong, to protect the people you love. And when the moment came to protect your mother, you chose to protect your own comfort instead. So you, what? Destroyed her life? Mom, she's falling apart. She's convinced everyone's against her. She barely sleeps. She's seeing a therapist. This isn't like you, isn't it? I said. How would you know what I'm like, Michael? When was the last time you really talked to me? Really asked about my life, my thoughts, my feelings? I'm not just your mother, sweetheart. I'm a person. I'm a woman who's lived 72 years, who's survived things you can't imagine, who's fought battles you'll never know about. And I won't be dismissed. Not in my own home. Not by anyone. The line went quiet again. Then Michael said in a small voice, did you really do all the things she says you did? I thought about lying. I thought about it hard. But I'm too old for lies, and this needed to end properly. I made sure that people knew who your wife really was, I said carefully. I didn't lie about her. I didn't make anything up. I just made sure that the truth she'd been hiding caught up with her. Everything that happened to her, the HOA complaints, the work problems, the social media issues, those were consequences of her own actions. I just helped those consequences along. Michael was crying. I could hear it in his breathing. I don't know what to do, Mom. You need to decide who you want to be, I told him. You need to decide if you're the kind of man who stands by while his wife insults his mother, who chooses a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth, who values status over integrity. Because right now, that's who you are. And I raised you to be better than that. We hung up shortly after. I didn't sleep that night, friends. I lay awake wondering if I'd gone too far. If I'd destroyed my relationship with my son in pursuit of revenge against his wife. 3 weeks later, Michael showed up at my door. Alone. He looked terrible, thinner, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised him, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with homework and celebrated his achievements. Jessica and I are separating, he said without preamble. I felt a jolt of shock and something else. Not quite triumph, but not quite regret either. Michael, it's not because of what you did, he said quickly. Or not just because of that. Mom, once I started really looking at her, really seeing her instead of just seeing what I wanted to see, I couldn't stop seeing. The way she talks about other people when they're not around. The way she treats service workers. The way she talked about you even before New Year's Eve. I'd been making excuses for years, telling myself she was just ambitious, just driven, just competitive. But she's more than that. She's cruel. And I married her anyway because she was beautiful and successful, and made me feel successful by association. He put his head in his hands. You were right. I should have defended you. I should have said something. I just sat there like a coward. Michael, I said gently, reaching across the table to take his hand, what I did wasn't right either. I went too far. I let my hurt and anger turn me into someone I'm not proud of. But you're not wrong about Jessica, he said. All those things you brought to light, they were all true, weren't they? I nodded slowly. Then maybe, he said, maybe I needed to see them. Maybe I needed someone to force me to look at what I'd been ignoring. We talked for hours that day. Really talked the way we hadn't in years. I apologized for the extent of my revenge, and he apologized for his silence, for years of choosing the easy path over the right one. We didn't fix everything in one conversation, that's not how families work, but we made a start. Jessica moved out 3 months later. The divorce was finalized this past fall. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to another city, started over somewhere where her reputation hadn't preceded her. I genuinely hope she's learned from all this, that she's become a better person. I'm not proud of being the instrument of her downfall, but I'm not entirely sorry either. As for Michael and me, we're rebuilding. He comes for dinner every Sunday now and we talk. Really talk. He's dating someone new. A kindergarten teacher named Amy who laughs easily and asks me genuine questions about my life. Last week, she asked if I'd teach her how to make my pot roast. I said yes. And that, my friends, is my story. The story of how a 72-year-old woman they thought was a failure showed them exactly what she was capable of. I'm not telling you this to encourage revenge. Lord knows I lost as much as I gained in this whole mess. But I'm telling you this because I want you to know that silence isn't always the answer. That sometimes standing up for yourself costs something, but not standing up for yourself costs more. I learned that I had more fight in me than I thought. I learned that my son needed to see me as a whole person, not just as his mother. And I learned that sometimes the people who dismiss you as failures are the ones most afraid of their own inadequacies. So there you have it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to an old woman's tale. Hit that like button if you think people should stand up for themselves no matter their age. Subscribe if you want to hear more real stories from real people. And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think about all this. Was I wrong? Was I right? Was I a little bit of both? I'm genuinely curious to know. This is Mary, signing off and reminding you that you're never too old to surprise people, even yourself. Take care of yourselves out there and remember, respect your elders. You never know what they're capable of.